crash momentarily for class solidarity. Cash circulating, give the masses back its currency. Greed from elites, oligarchs stay fed. Deep state, fake fed, everybody break bread. Racism, homophobia, sexism, religion in this melting pot we live in. Time to build a new system, unionize labor rights. Highlight the issue, talking heads left is best. The saga continues. The Nomiki Show.
Hello and welcome to the Nomiki Show. I am once again here live in Puerto Rico, so I apologize. We're not in studio. I've been here filming for the week this documentary, which just keeps making lots of twists and turns. Definitely an experience, and I'm excited to share it all with you when it's ready in our lifetimes, hopefully. Knock on wood. I have a wood table here. It is Wednesday, March 23rd, and the news is just scarier every single day. I'm watching the news right now of Putin's representatives basically saying that if the threat is existential, perhaps the nuclear option is on the table. This is concerning. I think a lot of folks are very concerned about this. We're going to be covering more and more of what's happening in Ukraine and in Eastern Europe, and covering how Biden's trip to Brussels to meet with NATO partners, what happens with that. But today we have a very tight show, very special show, partly because I am traveling. It is Solidarity Wednesdays. As you all know, every Wednesday we have our dear friend Benjamin Dixon from the Benjamin Dixon Show on. He's going to be joining us a little bit later for two rounds, one with Representative Renitta Shannon, who is representative in the Georgia House of Representatives, to talk about a new bill by the Republicans that will transfer power from the State Board of Elections to the Georgia Board of Investigations. Interesting. What's behind that? What does that mean? Obviously, there's a lot of things at play there. And then later, we are going to have our dear friend Harvey Kaye on with Alan Minsky to discuss the new Economic Bill of Rights. That will be with Benjamin Dixon will be joining us for that. But first off, very excited. Our first guest is going to be Donald Cohen, who is the co-author of The Privatization of Everything, the Plunder of Public Goods, How the Plunder of Public Goods Transformed America, and How We Can Fight Back. He is the executive director of In the Public Interest. All right, guys, if this is the time, if you haven't already, make sure to join us on patreon.com/The Nomiki Show. Our patrons are what keep this show alive and well. It's how we can do it on the road when I'm filming other stuff. It's how I can, honestly, seriously, it's how I can take all this gear with me on the flight because it's expensive to check those bags. Our patrons make sure everything happens. Make sure we have David working his butt off. That is how our community grows, because we can't rely on the algorithms. We know that the algorithms in little places like YouTube and Twitch and all the different spots that we release our show to, you just never can predict. One month you're doing kick ass, the other month you're down a certain percentage. We don't know how those algorithm gods work. I think we kind of do, but that's for them to figure out. It is patrons who keep us going. If you've been a patron and you can no longer stay at that level, or be a patron and want to stay a patron, please reach out to us. Email us at thenomikishow@gmail.com. We will figure something out. If you have it in your heart to sponsor another patron, we love that too. And there have been plenty of people who've done that. That is how this community stays alive. So thank you to everybody. Also, make sure to share this on the social media. Yeah, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. Got to keep it going. Got to keep disrupting those algorithms out there and making sure people tune in, like and subscribe, get in those comments, make sure to shift things up. And as always, really grateful to you. We are going to take a quick break, and we will be right back to talk about how this entire world's getting privatized with Donald Cohen. welcome back to the Nomiki Show, a special Puerto Rico edition. I'm excited to welcome our first guest. He is the co-author of The Privatization of Everything, How the Plunder of Public Goods Transformed America and How We Can Fight Back, and the executive director of In the Public Interest, Donald Cohen. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm in Tennessee, so it's good to visiting Tennessee, and you're visiting Puerto Rico. So that's
working during our, I'm not on vacation, but working while we're traveling.
Yep.
So Donald, this is privatization is not something new, but it does seem like it's gotten a little bit out of control. I guess we could just, my first question is, when did privatization, the model of privatization, begin?
That's a interesting. There's a multi-sided answer. So many people thought it was President Reagan. Right, so that President Reagan came in to, attacking government and all that, but it actually wasn't. So there was a prehistory. There were conservative intellectuals, libertarians, and market fundamentalists, neoliberals, who really were worried, trying to figure out how to push back on the New Deal. As Harvey Kaye would say, on sort of the four freedoms type of, as you're going to have later, right? And so, people like Frederick Hayek, Milton Friedman, and other that. So they were sort of identifying, we need to figure out how to push back on the idea that government is an instrument of good that can serve the people, fundamentally. Reagan came, and they were doing lots of work and work in the cities as well. There were people who were saying in the 70s, well, governments don't need to pick up the trash nor be the police. We can outsource all those things. There's no reason the market couldn't take care of that. Reagan comes in and, he's sort of the propagandist in chief for an anti-government, pro-market set of values. But what most people don't realize is he actually failed to privatize much. And Democrats were in control of the House and the Senate, as well as there was still kind of the New Deal ethic was still kind of had a dominated the culture. People wanted the stuff. And so by the end of the Reagan, I'm trying to give a long answer, but by the end of the Reagan administration, strategists from the Heritage Foundation, from Cato, realized that privatization could be a way to break the pro-budget and pro-government consensus by directing demands for services, because people still wanted the stuff, directing those demands to the private sector. So it became kind of a key strategy to downsize government, to weaken public support for government. President Clinton gets elected, and the era of big government is over, and he institutionalized privatization that Reagan couldn't do.
And if you were to describe privatization in a sentence, I think a lot of people hear it or familiar with it more or less, but is there sort of a purist definition of it?
Well, I have a very particular definition, and it does need some explanation. So I say it's private control over public goods. So what I mean by, first off, what do we mean by public goods? The things that we all need to survive and thrive, and that we need everybody to have so that we can all survive and thrive. Whether we need a good education system for our kids, but even if you don't have kids, we need every child to be educated. That's good for the country and for all of us. So private control happens, and then private control happens in a variety of ways. And I'll give some examples to make it clearer, but it's, we sign long-term contracts with private companies that hand over, that give them legal contractual authority over things that we ought to be able to have. Or things like childcare. I consider childcare in the US a fully privatized public good. We all need it. I mean, if you have kids, you need it. There's no question about it. But it's fundamentally a commodity, and parents are left on their own to figure it out in the market when it really should be available to everybody, high quality childcare. So, it's a broad definition. If you'd like, I can, I'll let you continue, but it's, it'd be good I could give a few examples to make all that clear. It sounds abstract sometimes.
Yeah, of course. Go ahead. What are some examples?
Well, so the example one of the things I like to use a lot is from Chicago during the Great Recession, 2008. Cities bleeding red ink, cities, states, in horrible fiscal shape governments were because of the crash of the economy. So a private consortium of three companies, Morgan Stanley, Wall Street investment firm, an investment firm, what's called a sovereign wealth fund from a country in the Middle East, a national fund, and a national parking company, offered the city $1.1 billion upfront in cash in exchange for control of the city's 36,000 parking meters for 75 years, till 2083. Okay, now the proposal was announced on a Friday. They voted on a Tuesday, so not a lot of scrutiny. Private companies that want to privatize things, one of the things they say is, desperate government is our best customer. So that was the case there. So, but here's what became true after the fact and when the analysis happened. Now, let me just say, unbelievably stupid way to borrow on your future parking meter revenues. I mean, we all borrow on future income. That's how we buy houses or what have you. But 75 years, we may not even be driving. So, but here's what's even much more important. If the city, for the life of the contracts, the remaining 60 some odd years, wants to eliminate parking spots temporarily for a street fair, or more importantly, permanently for bike lanes, dedicated bus lanes, pedestrian malls to deal with climate, traffic, housing, they have to buy the spots back, which means they often don't do it. A professor that I know, we wrote a piece together. She had interviewed transit planners after the deal was done in Chicago, and they couldn't implement a plan to expand bus rapid transit. So the reason I tell that story is because those contracts, embed their interests in our stuff, and they're straitjackets on democracy, because the elected leaders can they're handcuffed to be able to do their job.
So just to get this right, so folks, the contract is to basically for a company to control the flow of money into these parking meters, but the land is still the city's. Yet because of this contract, they cannot do what they want with the land because they have this other contract that sort of voids any because it's contingent on having a place to park.
Yeah, I mean, there's if they take a spot away, I mean, the private company doesn't own the street, the spot, right. They own the meter. But if you take a spot away, meaning you have to take a meter away so they can't make money from that spot, you got to pay them for it.
That's insane. Unbelievable. I mean, that's basically holding the city hostage to whatever they want, especially these extremely long contracts.
Right. And it's a terrible deal. Everybody knows it's a terrible deal, but there are features of it that are very common.
Now, are there any instances, and we can get into how cities have fought back against privatization, but are there any instances in which there are contracts that have been in place, these crazy predatory contracts that come in when, a city's in bankruptcy or it's after the recession, et cetera, and here now you have to take a 150-year contract with this banking, whatever, the same exact story.
Yeah.
But are there any examples of where those contracts were broken?
Well, in Chicago, because a deal's a deal, so it depends on the fine print of the contract. When Rahm Emanuel became the mayor, because everyone hates it, the only thing he was able to do was to renegotiate it, because they wanted to have free parking on Sunday mornings for church, but in exchange, they had to expand parking during the week till 10 p.m. So a deal's a deal. Now, there are cases, there's a water deal in Montana. There was a water deal in Montana. It often, when they want to break contracts or eliminate contracts, it often results in lawsuits.
I mean, it could be also a company that falls apart. I mean, a lot of these companies over leverage themselves. So in that case, what if there's a company that is bought by another company, or, right. How do you deal with that kind of contract at that point?
Well, there was a road deal in this is again infrastructure road deal in Indiana when this was under Mitch Daniels before Pence, and then Pence was involved later on as governor. they made projections. They were going to make this much money. It wasn't working out. They went bankrupt. The control of the entity that controlled the road went bankrupt. The state had the opportunity to basically take control of it and just then now run it as a state effort. But this was when Pence was governor and he was sort of ideologically inclined towards privatization. So he decided to sell it again to a different company. So it can happen. I mean, there are water systems around the country that have been remunicipalized or re-brought back in. Not necessarily because of bankruptcies, but different reasons. Some because they could do it cheaper, some because people realize they want control of their water. It's not, the private company shouldn't be making money off of it and have decision-making authority over things like conservation or climate issues, resilience issues, things like that.
So how do these companies tend to perform? Is there sort of a common theme that when an agency, a utility is privatized, they do better, worse? Are there some that do better in certain industries or worse than certain industries? How does this measure?
It's all over the map, right? It's hard to generalize, but so I will make some general points. Because there are companies that do good work. The privatized roads are still there. I've been on a few of them. But here's the thing to understand, right? It's a few key things. One is money is number one. Things cost money. Second is that if it's a private company, there's money being taken away from the service for high, executive compensation packages were often high, for returns to investors, often for debt service, because companies often buy other companies and take debt. So that money is leaving the service. So then the question is, where do they get that money? Because they all say they're going to do it cheaper. That's the other key argument. And it's a pretty finite list of things they can get it cheaper from. If it's a prison, fewer workers, which they've done. So, there's a privatized juvenile facility, I think in Mississippi, went from 1 to 12 corrections officers to inmates to 1 to 60. Wow. It became a terrible scene, right? Or you could pay them less, which they do, and higher turnover. I mean, so there's sort of negative impacts of that, all the above. You could use, lower quality equipment, like, or paint on the wall, or food services, or what have you. It's pretty finite what you can spend less money on. So we always look at the incentive structures, right? The incentives, like, where's the money going? Are they incentivized to cut corners beyond what should be, not just trim things to make it more efficient, but to cut corners? And you see that all over the place. But the key feature is it depends on the contracting agency. Interesting. Because contracting is pretty hard. And government agencies often get taken because it's complicated and it's long-term and you got to think ahead. And, if you do really good contracting, you can protect yourself on some of those things. Interesting.
Okay. So there have been municipalities who fought off and, the people have fought off privatization, post-privatization, pre-privatization. Teachers famously are constantly in this fight over privatization. I'm here on the island of Puerto Rico, and this is a huge fight here over everything from the energy sector to teachers, and this is sort of the incubator, I would say, for a lot of these strategies without going down a rabbit hole. But where have they won, and how has that happened? What's the playbook?
Well, again, when you read a book called The Privatization of Everything, it's hard to get it down to a few things. But I'll start with a big example. I'm in Tennessee right now. I just got here last night. Republican state, a voucher law was beat, proposal to create school vouchers was beat last week in the legislature here because rural Republican legislators saw that it would siphon money from their schools that they like, because that's actually what does happen. So to the larger point there is that they win when they can show the impacts. Right? Schools, the growth of charter schools take away money from public schools, more than the money that comes with the kid because it costs more. Vouchers take away money, and that affects everybody, right? So that's the other way we've helped, people have won, and we've helped one is by sort of interrogating the proposals. wait a second, you say you're going to save money. How? Like, what are you going to spend less on? Is it going to cut wages, or you're going to have less people, or, or what could happen? Just take Chicago. What could happen? Will we lose the ability in 10 years to make decisions to respond to the climate crisis? When you ask those questions, and you go down through those things to really interrogate the proposal, you can beat them, and we do. It happens a lot.
Does it seem like the public's opinion on privatization of utilities is shifting?
Hard to know. Infrastructure, utility, water, roads, bridges, so physical infrastructure, they now use the term public-private partnerships. And there's a specific meaning of that. It has particular terms of how things are financed and all that. But in part, it's because privatization has a little bit of a bad rap, right? If you remember George W. Bush, right, was going to use his political capital, as it were, to privatize Social Security, and that didn't go well because people get the stock market isn't always there for you. So in public-private partnerships like motherhood and apple pie, and it actually just happened last night or yesterday. Someone asked, a reporter asked, they will often say for a public-private partnership, well, it's a 75-year deal, but it's not privatization because we'll own it. We'll get it back in 75 years. That's wrong. So the other example I could give, boy, whoever's doing that's really good.
David, he's on it. I say the same thing. I can't tell you how many times I've the word isn't even fully out of my mouth and it's up on screen. I'm like, how does he know?
He is good. So this is a very specific example, but broadband. Right now, I think everybody gets now that access to the internet is as important as the road system. It's basic infrastructure everybody needs, and we need everybody to have. So a bunch of big the big telecoms go to state legislatures to try to prevent and prohibit local governments from creating municipal public broadband. Okay, and they do that down here in the South, but they did in Colorado, but allowed for citizens of voters in cities, if they did want municipal broadband, they could do a public vote. Every place that did it won overwhelmingly. Now, why? I can speculate. One is they need it. It's probably cheaper. And none of us like our internet companies. We get that private isn't always better.
And the prices can go up too. I mean, I think right now what I'm curious about is, given this history of privatization and the economic moment we're in, just there are many municipalities that have been underfunded for. Let's take New York City, for instance. Our subway system has been starved for years. We refuse to tax certain individuals or companies or real estate developers who could fund the subway system, or the CUNY, the school, university of the city. I mean, these are all different aspects of the city that should be generating more wealth than any other city probably in the United States. Yet the subway is completely in disarray, hasn't been updated, has lots of issues. There's a board that oversees it that has a lot of developer ties. Is this sort of the model, like they starve it and then the private companies come in and they say, oh, we're going to fix it? But
yes.
I guess the question is, do they fix them usually? And are the rates cheaper? Here in Puerto Rico, that's not happening. I know that with the energy sector. So
you nailed it. So first off, but one more piece of the puzzle. There's been a 40-year narrative attack on drumbeat against government, right? Both the idea of government and the institution of government, right? We all hate the DMV, even though that's actually not true anymore in my town. It's like, okay. So, but there's this constant negative attack on government. I don't know who that guy is. So that's number one. Number two is there's also been tax cutting. We've all been in an environment of tax cutting. Okay, so put those as part of the background. So you have public services that then don't have the resources, and so therefore start to decline. You have an attack on them. And then the privatizers will come in, or the market types will come in and say, we've got the answer. We're the reformers. Cheaper, better, faster. the key there is to say, okay, first, and I've done that, I've talked to lots of reporters. It sounds so obvious. I say, first thing you got to do is things cost money, period. Second thing you got to understand is there's only one place to get it, us, period, right? So when they also, when they want to take over something, they'll say cheaper, better, faster, and no new taxes. It's a lie.
Sure. I'm sure that's true.
Well, here's why it doesn't matter. Because there's only one place to get the money from us: taxes, tolls, and fees. So yeah, there may be no new taxes, but the fees go way up, right? The parking meters in Chicago went way up. Water systems have been privatized. I mean, listen, the rates may have been too low to maintain the system. They get the system, and then they raise the rates because it costs money. And not only does it cost money, but now you have extra money for returns to investors. You got to pay for stuff.
Interesting. Extra money for returns to investors. Okay. I think the last question I have, and this comes from David, who's been very relevant in this conversation. Just for those of you who are listening on podcast, we're referencing a lot of the screen things that pop up on screen, if you're wondering. So David says, how do they continue to successfully argue for more privatization despite the negative results? And I'll add, despite the negative reputation at this point. Even PPP, I think, is starting to lose its effectiveness.
Mm-hmm. It's frustration with government agencies that don't do a good job. I mean, government's complicated. They don't always do a good job. It's our job to reform them and make them better and better and better. It's taking advantage of that. Number two is this sort of, propaganda machine, pro-market propaganda machine. It is a belief that business is more efficient than public institutions. It's a belief that's deeply embedded in American culture. Now, like I was referring earlier, when people talk about efficiency to me, I say, that's spending less on something. Tell me exactly what you're going to spend less on. That's not, because, you got to kind of break through. They believe that markets are, competition is what makes things better. And that's certainly true in certain areas, but competition in charter schools causes schools to push out kids that are costly or harder to educate, right? So there's a downside to these things as well. So we're in this environment of pro-market ideas, number one. Number two is, it's become a conservative effort to privatize, in part because they want to downsize government, in second part because they want to downsize and really eliminate public sector unions, so that it gives them an opportunity to get political control. And then the private companies that get the deals, remember the profits that the private prison industry has gotten from the public, every dollar was a tax dollar, has been used in the past to lobby for laws that put more people in prison so that they can sell more heads and beds, right? So there's there's both political and ideological reasons and then I guess the last is desperation. If you're a mayor and you're running a city and somebody comes and shows you pretty pictures and it's one less problem, you don't think ahead. You drink the Kool-Aid and you go, and it's not, a lot of bad decisions are made in that situation.
And of course, if they're donating to your campaign, it makes it much easier.
There's always a little bit there's a club there.
I think this is what some might call a racket. A little bit of a racket.
Well, here's what it is. Pre-COVID, so governments in America were spending $7 trillion a year. It's now more, right? Mm-hmm. $7 trillion. So if you're running a private prison company, or you're running a water company, or you're running whatever, you're trying. All businesses do is sell stuff.
Right.
So they want to sell to us, and they have a whole marketing and promotion and lobbying operation, surrounding it. Yep.
Well, everybody go check out Donald Cohen's new book on privatization titled "The Privatization of Everything."
it's pretty finite what you can spend less money on. So we always look at the incentive structures, right? The incentives, like, where's the money going? Are they incentivized to cut corners beyond what should be, not just trim things to make it more efficient, but to cut corners. And you see that all over the place. But the key feature is it depends on the contracting agency.
Interesting.
Because contracting is pretty hard. And government agencies often get taken because it's complicated and it's long-term and you got to think ahead. And, if you do really good contracting, you can protect yourself on some of those things.
Interesting. Okay. So there have been municipalities who fought off and, the people have fought off privatization, post-privatization, pre-privatization. Teachers famously are constantly in this fight over privatization. I'm here on the island of Puerto Rico, and this is a huge fight here over everything from the energy sector to teachers, and this is sort of the incubator, I would say, for a lot of these strategies without going down a rabbit hole. But where have they won, and how has that happened? What's the playbook?
Well, again, when you read a book called The Privatization of Everything, it's hard to get it down to a few things. But I'll start with a big example. I'm in Tennessee right now. I just got here last night. Republican state, a voucher law was beat, proposal to create school vouchers was beat last week in the legislature here because rural Republican legislators saw that it would siphon money from their schools that they like, because that's actually what does happen. So to the larger point there is that they win when they can show the impacts, right? The growth of charter schools take away money from public schools, more than the money that comes with the kid because it costs more. Vouchers take away money, and that affects everybody, right? So that's the other way we've helped, people have won, and we've helped one is by sort of interrogating the proposals. Wait a second, you say you're going to save money. How? Like, what are you going to spend less on? Is it going to cut wages, or are you going to have less people, or or what could happen? Just take Chicago. What could will we lose the ability in 10 years to make decisions to respond to the climate crisis? When you ask those questions, and you go down through those things to really interrogate the proposal, you can beat them, and we do. It happens a lot.
Does it seem like the public's opinion on privatization of utilities is shifting?
Hard to know. Infrastructure, utility, water, roads, bridges, so physical infrastructure, they now use the term public-private partnerships. And there's a specific meaning of that. It has particular terms of how things are financed and all that. But in part, it's because privatization has a little bit of a bad rap, right? If you remember George W. Bush, right, was going to use his political capital, as it were, to privatize Social Security, and that didn't go well because people get the stock market isn't always there for you. So in public-private partnerships like motherhood and apple pie, and it actually just happened last night or yesterday. Someone asked, a reporter asked, they will often say for a public-private partnership, well, it's a 75-year deal, but it's not privatization because we'll own it. We'll get it back in 75 years. That's wrong. So the other example I could give, boy, whoever's doing that's really good.
David, he's on it. I say the same thing. I can't tell you how many times I've the word isn't even fully out of my mouth and it's up on screen. I'm like, how does he know?
He is good. So this is a very specific example, but broadband. Right now, I think everybody gets now that access to the internet is as important as the road system. It's basic infrastructure everybody needs, and we need everybody to have. So a bunch of big the big telecoms go to state legislatures to try to prevent and prohibit local governments from creating municipal public broadband. Okay, and they do that down here in the South, but they did in Colorado, but allowed for citizens of voters in cities, if they did want municipal broadband, they could do a public vote. Every place that did it won overwhelmingly. Now, why? I can speculate. One is they need it. It's probably cheaper. None of us like our internet companies. We get that private isn't always better.
And the prices can go up too. I mean, I think right now what I'm curious about is, given this history of privatization and the economic moment we're in, just I mean, there are many municipalities that have been underfunded for. Let's take New York City, for instance. Our subway system has been starved for years. We refuse to tax certain individuals or companies or real estate developers who could fund the subway system, or, the CUNY, the school, university of the city. I mean, these are all different aspects of the city that should be generating more wealth than any other city probably in the United States. Yet the subway is completely in disarray. It hasn't been updated. It has lots of issues. There's a board that oversees it that has a lot of developer ties. Is this sort of the model? Like, they starve it and then the private companies come in and they say, oh, we're going to fix it. But
yes.
I guess the question is, do they fix them usually? And are the rates cheaper? Here in Puerto Rico, that's not happening. I know that with the energy sector.
So you nailed it. So first off, but one more piece of the puzzle. There's been a 40-year narrative attack on drumbeat against government, right? Both the idea of government and the institution of government, right? We all hate the DMV, even though that's actually not true anymore in my town. It's like, okay. So, but there's this constant negative attack on government. I don't know who that guy is. So that's number one. Number two is there's also been tax cutting. We've all been in an environment of tax cutting. Okay, so put those as part of the background. So you have public services that then don't have the resources, and so therefore start to decline. You have an attack on them. And then the privatizers will come in, or the market types will come in and say, we've got the answer. We're the reformers. Cheaper, better, faster. The key there is to say, okay, first, and I've done that. I've talked to lots of reporters. It sounds so obvious. I say, first thing you got to do is things cost money, period. Second thing you got to understand is there's only one place to get it, us, period, right? So when they also, when they want to take over something, they'll say cheaper, better, faster, and no new taxes. It's a lie.
Sure. I'm sure that's true.
Well, here's why it doesn't matter. Because there's only one place to get the money from us: taxes, tolls, and fees. So yeah, there may be no new taxes, but the fees go way up, right? The parking meters in Chicago went way up. Water systems have been privatized. I mean, listen, the rates may have been too low to maintain the system. They get the system, and then they raise the rates because it costs money. And not only does it cost money, but now you have extra money for returns to investors. You got to pay for stuff.
Interesting. Extra money for returns to investors. Okay. I think the last question I have, and this comes from David, who's been very relevant to this conversation. Just for those of you who are listening on podcast, we're referencing a lot of the screen things that pop up on screen, if you're wondering. So David says, how do they continue to successfully argue for more privatization despite the negative results? And I'll add, despite the negative reputation at this point. Even PPP, I think, is starting to lose its effectiveness.
Mm-hmm. It's frustration with government agencies that don't do a good job. I mean, government's complicated. They don't always do a good job. It's our job to reform them and make them better and better and better. It's taking advantage of that. Number two is this sort of, propaganda machine, pro-market propaganda machine. It is a belief that business is more efficient than public institutions. It's a belief that's deeply embedded in American culture. Now, like I was referring earlier, when people talk about efficiency to me, I say, that's spending less on something. Tell me exactly what you're going to spend less on. That's not, because, you got to kind of break through. They believe that markets are, competition is what makes things better. And that's certainly true in certain areas, but competition in charter schools causes schools to push out kids that are costly or harder to educate. right? So there's a downside to these things as well. So, so we're in this environment of pro-market ideas, number one. Number two is, it's become a conservative effort to privatize, in part because they want to downsize government, in second part because they want to downsize and really eliminate public sector unions, so that it gives them an opportunity to get political control. And then the private companies that get the deals, remember the profits that the private prison industry has gotten from the public, every dollar was a tax dollar, has been used in the past to lobby for laws that put more people in prison so that they can sell more heads and beds, right? So there's there's both political and ideological reasons and then I guess the last is desperation. If you're a mayor and you're running a city and somebody comes and shows you pretty pictures and it's one less problem, you don't think ahead. You drink the Kool-Aid and you go, and it's not, a lot of bad decisions are made in that situation.
And of course, if they're donating to your campaign, it makes it much easier.
There's always a little bit there's a club there.
I think this is what some might call a racket. A little bit of a racket.
Well, here's what it is. Pre-COVID, so governments in America were spending $7 trillion a year. It's now more, right? Mm-hmm. $7 trillion. So if you're running a private prison company, or you're running a water company, or you're running whatever, you're trying. All businesses do is sell stuff.
Right.
So they want to sell to us, and they have a whole marketing and promotion and lobbying operation, surrounding it. Yep.
Well, everybody go check out Donald Cohen's new book on privatization titled The Privatization of Everything: How the Plunder of Public Goods Transformed America and How We Can Fight Back. That's the key part here. How we can fight back. I think the momentum's on our side. The energy is shifting, but we need to know how to do it. So everyone go check out Donald Cohen's book. Donald, thank you so much for joining us. Enjoy Tennessee.
Yeah, thank you. And people can get in touch. We have lots of tools and tricks on how to fight. If you're in a particular area, just go to our website. You can find us really easy.
Website's going to be in all the information sections. You can go check out the organization that Donald's the executive director of, titled In the Public Interest, and we'll put your Twitter link up there as well. So thank you very much for joining us, Donald. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Enjoyed this.
All right, it's Solidarity Wednesdays. We will be back after a quick little break with the one and only Benjamin Dixon and Representative Renitta Shannon to talk about, more oppressive laws trying to be passed in Georgia. Shocker. That's the new model. We'll be right back after this short break.
Opposition to House Bill 1464. Several provisions in this bill really are written so loosely and the language is so poor that there's really not a way to comply with this bill. There's really not a way to know if you are complying with the bill. I want to first draw your attention to Section 12, line 745 through line 751, and I'll read the section. No ballots shall be handled without a poll official being present and without documentation on the chain of custody documentation forms of who is handling such ballots and when and why such ballots are being handled. After the activity requiring the handling of ballots is completed, such ballots shall be resealed in ballot boxes or other secure containers, which shall be recorded and witnessed on chain of custody documentation forms as specified by the Secretary of State and shall be signed by the persons having custody of such ballots. This section is something that I brought up in committee when we saw this provision in a separate bill that came through governmental affairs. The language is written so loosely, and it's requiring you to have a poll official present when ballots are being handled. What does the word handled mean? When you look up the word handled in the dictionary, it says to feel or manipulate with hands. Or a second definition is to manage a situation or a problem. So what are we talking about here? Are we saying that you've got to have a poll official available if you touch a ballot, if you move a ballot? I mean, literally, if you pick up a ballot that falls on the floor, do you have to call a poll official to supervise that? When we're talking about elections, it's really important that we have language that is concise, because we know what happens when you have loose language in bills. What happens is prosecution is subjective. And that's when we start to see that when Black and brown voters exercise their power and it's effective, we start to see more prosecutions.
Oof. Welcome back to the Nomiki Show. It is Solidarity Wednesday. As always, I am so grateful to have our dear friend Benjamin Dixon joining us from the Benjamin Dixon Show, who I joined this morning for a great conversation. Thank you for having me, by the way.
Always a pleasure.
Very excited. The star of that last video we're very honored to have her join us today, Representative Renitta Shannon. She is a member of the Georgia House of Representatives in District 84 and a candidate for Lieutenant Governor. Representative Shannon, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for thank you for allowing me to be here.
Of course. So we just saw you part of your speech, and we'll put the link up so people can watch the full speech from the floor in reaction to this new bill. And I curious, what is their intention with this? But what is the argument they're trying to make?
So it's a few things, and this is actually the second voter suppression bill or bill that is determined to destroy our elections in Georgia that we've seen come from the Republicans. And really, the root of all of these bills is really just one thing. They want to relitigate the 2020 election. And so this bill that we see now is really to try to satisfy these people who just cannot understand that Donald Trump lost the 2020 presidential election because he simply did not get enough votes. And so what you are seeing are attacks on mostly Black and brown voters for having shown up to the ballot box and unelected and failed to allow him to be reelected. It's because Black and brown voters have shown up and exercised their political power that we are seeing all these bills come through that don't even make any sense. As I pointed out in my speech, the language is so poor, there's no way to even know if you're complying with these new election bills.
So what is their subtle intention? We know so they want to obviously disenfranchise Black and brown voters. When you're talking to colleagues on the floor, if you are talking to colleagues on the floor, when you say that to them, how do they respond?
They really are in their own bubble. They really do believe that there was some type of fraud in the election. So they really just can't conceive that people would show up and not reelect Donald Trump. So that's part of it. The other part is they really just want to satisfy their base. And that's what, most of this is about. So this bill is very similar to the media that you're seeing around the Florida bill, where they want to have an election police. This bill brings in the GBI to pretty much be our election force. So it's just a coordinated effort across the country of Republicans trying to relitigate this election and trying to make sure that we intimidate Black and brown voters into not being able to vote.
Ben, you're in Georgia. You organize in Georgia. You have lots of folks on from Georgia. How do folks feel on the ground? Like, it almost seems like it's just too much at once.
I'll tell you, people are really upset, including groups that we've never seen really upset about election bills. Because as I pointed out last year, when we saw the big voter suppression bill pass through, their intention is to target Black and brown voters. But really, these voter suppression bills hurt everybody. So I just got a call yesterday from some seniors in my district, a predominantly white assisted living facility, a group of seniors who their old process was that when it came time to vote, they would have the office manager fax in the request for absentee ballots, and then they would fill out their absentee ballot, and then they would have the office manager return ballots for them. Because of the last voter suppression bill that we saw pass, all of that is now illegal. So these seniors are sitting around trying to figure out how to vote. So to answer your question, we are seeing people who previously did not even have, were not being targeted by these election bills, who are now adding to the opposition about how bad these bills are, because they also are feeling the ramifications of what just legislation that just doesn't make sense.
Yes, Nomiki, I was, and good afternoon to you both. I think one of the feelings I get from this is the idea that Black and brown voters are resilient, and we are, and we can and shall overcome. But if you have to ask, like the sentiment is that the people on the ground are consistently having to organize the voter suppression tactics of Republicans. And we sure could use a little bit of help from the federal level to help stop some of this that is happening in real time right in front of our eyes.
When you say federal level, you mean the actual U.S. government, or does it also mean maybe like the party level?
Well, actually, all the above, right? So we're still waiting on the Democratic Party to do something about voting rights on the federal level to help prevent some of this type of intrusion into the voting rights on the state level. Georgia, along with several other states, are beneficiaries of Shelby versus Holder being gutted. And so now they're able to do these types of games without having to check with the Department of Justice. And so it would be nice if the Democratic Party, the federal government, and anyone who actually likes democracy would stop these Republicans for kind of a change,
Representative Shannon, this is not the only bill like this, and you mentioned that. Can you just list off some of the other stuff that they've presented that could affect this election this year, the election that you're in, for instance?
So SB 202 was a major voter suppression bill that made national coverage that we saw pass in Georgia. But there are a lot of provisions within that bill so that people focused on previously. They focused on the things like not being able to give voters standing in line water or snacks if they are standing in long lines. But there are other provisions in the bill that have already taken effect, and we've already seen elections happen under these suppressive bills. So, for example, the Atlanta municipal elections were some of the first elections that took place after SB 202 was passed. That bill also had a provision in it where it basically said if you show up to the wrong voting location and you try to vote with a provisional ballot, if there are certain hours within the day that if you show up during that time, that provisional ballot will be thrown away. Your vote will be thrown away. And you don't yes, Ben, I see your face. Yes. And this stuff, it just makes no sense. And so again, it's really it's interesting because in 2016, when Hillary Clinton lost the election, folks on the left just understood not enough people voted for her.
Right.
And it's really the same thing that we're seeing with them trying to relitigate this election. I don't understand what is the reason that they can't understand not enough people showed up and voted for Donald Trump. People didn't like the way that he ran the country. They didn't like how he neglected his duties around COVID. People did not want to vote for that. And that's it. He lost because not enough people showed up and voted for him. That's
well, I think we know what it's really about. But I mean, because never let a crisis go to waste. So the Republicans, of course, are going to use this to strike out so many of their culture wars, voter suppression, modeling it for other states, modeling for the federal level for all we know. How do you see this kind of playing it on their side? Because when our side gets frustrated because of these things, naturally so, their side somehow it becomes dangerous. Are we feeling like that's happening? I'll ask both of you because you're on the ground.
So we've already seen some of this play out because they keep talking about that there's fraud in the elections. That was one of the reasons why Democrats were able to gain the 2 U.S. Senate seats here in Georgia, because their voters are believing what their elected representatives are telling them, that there's fraud in these elections. So their voters are saying, well, then why should I even bother to turn out? And so it's a never ending stream of them dragging, Georgia's code through a bunch of nonsense to try to satisfy people who will never be satisfied, because these people, I still get emails of people saying throw out the 2020 election, invalidate the electors, and pretty much redo the election. I got one yesterday, actually. I'm still receiving emails from their voters saying that. I'm not kidding.
Nomiki, I'm listening to Representative Shannon, and it's amazing what they can get away with when they manufacture consent alongside hysteria. They have whipped up a lot of hysteria around the idea that it's impossible for Donald Trump to have lost that election, and they know it's a lie. I just want to start with every Republican who's an elected official knows that that is a lie, but they'll play dumb. They'll play concerned as if they really care about democracy. But at the end of the day, they know that if they whip up their base into a frenzy enough, they can get actual electoral results based on the false claim of voter fraud.
All right. Well, final thoughts here. I know you don't have a lot of time. You're very busy. Representative Shannon, where is this going to go? Do you think that they're actually going to win at this level, or is this just sort of a tool to get people angry?
I do not think so that they will win on this, because like I said before, it's hurting their voters. And the regressive legislation that we've seen in Georgia, which is really creating a harsh reality for so many Georgians, is the reason why I'm running for lieutenant governor, because we have had so much nonsense legislation come through the General Assembly that does nothing to make the lives of Georgians better. And so it's one of the reasons that I'm running. But to Ben's point, where is this going to go? What he said was true and accurate, which is that Democrats at the federal level have got to get this done. I was one of the first people to say early on when the Biden administration took over, was just that we need a new Voting Rights Act, and we need to make sure that everybody's right is secure to vote, particularly in states like Georgia. So Democrats have got to get this done.
Ben, do you have any final questions?
Actually, no question. I'm just excited about Representative Shannon having you on the show, on our morning show this week coming up. And I did not know. I'm sure it is in my notes somewhere, so I'm not going to blame my producer. But I'm excited to hear that you're running for lieutenant governor. So I'm looking forward to discussing that with you when you come on.
Thank you.
Very much so. Love to have you back on. I'm sure there's going to be more developments. Representative Shannon, good luck. Stay safe. Keep fighting the fight. We're really grateful for having you today. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
We're going to take a quick little break. Ben, you cool sticking around? We have Harvey, Kaye, and Alan Minsky. Wonderful. We're going to take a quick little break. Be right back. Welcome back to the Nomiki Show. It's Solidarity Wednesday. You know that means Benjamin Dixon's joining us. We're talking about how to support communities, allies, how to be good allies. You know the jam. Ben, this is an election year, and it's an election year after redistricting, so a lot of folks are getting a late start and figuring things out. Donations are harder to come by right now. It's hard to raise money online. People are tired. But some people have plans to get folks excited and focused on solutions. And our next two guests are partnering up to help candidates out there focus and have a vision to solve some of our worst problems. We have the one and only Harvey, Kaye. He's a professor emeritus at Wisconsin Green Bay, University of Wisconsin Green Bay, Emeritus of Democracy. I've said this a million times. He's the author of Thomas Paine and the Promise of America, Fight for Four Freedoms, Take Hold of Our History, and FDR and Democracy. And Alan Minsky, who is the one and only executive director of the Progressive Democrats of America. They have this plan. Oh, look at that. That's allyship. I don't have any. I have other people's books around me. I can't even. They're in Spanish. I have the San Juan Star in front of me.
Oh,
Guys,
there it is.
if I'm in a hostage situation today, you know that it's today. Okay. All right. So this economic bill of rights. Los historiadores marxistas.
Oh, wow.
Británicos. I can't read the rest because I'm too blind. That's Harvey Kaye's book in Spanish. British history of British Marxism. Is that right? Did I get it right?
It's about the British Marxist historians.
Historians, yes.
I was looking for the Japanese copy. I couldn't find it.
David goes showing off. Who's showing off? We're all showing off.
I'm just having a good time because it's great to see you and Ben.
Hey, it's good to see you both, all of you. Yeah.
So, all right, let's just start off with why are you doing this? Why don't we need an economic bill of rights? Why are we going to folks running for office to do so? Alan, this is smart. You've already got a system for us. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the public opinion polling in the United States of America you can take a really long stretch of time, say the past half century, and you're to add up what issues are at the top line and the leading issues of the day, I believe the economy would be lapping everything. Obviously, we have periods where foreign policy is more significant, or sometimes a subcomponent, and it's really of the economy, because let's face it, healthcare in America is both about lack of quality healthcare and also about cost. So that's definitely related to the economy when that does peak up close to the economy is a leading issue. But right now, there are three competing, and this season, there are two competing factions within the Democratic Party. It's very explicit and everybody knows it. We have these very clear races between very progressive candidates challenging very conservative incumbents. We even have coming up in on August 2nd in Michigan's 11th district, Andy Levin versus Haley Stevens, two incumbents who are now drawn together, going head to head, one from the right wing of the Democratic Party, one from the left. Following the two successive Sanders campaigns, we clearly have, and everybody in the country knows it, a progressive formation that really stands for something different inside the Democratic Party. But right now in the messaging, especially that enemies of the progressives are putting forward to try to sort of characterize or caricature progressives, the fact that, I mean, you look at the work that was done by the squad, by the really solid progressive members of the Progressive Caucus over the past year, right, since we've had the 217th Congress, and over again, the issues they're hitting on are strengthening Build Back Better in terms of its economic components. The economic redistributive, meaning back towards a just economy or a more just economy within the United States, is really the central focus of the work done on Capitol Hill by the Progressive Caucus. Of course, there's climate components, there's certainly racial justice components that are very strong. And we in no way want to distance ourselves from those. We fully, absolutely endorse. They're absolutely essential. But we have to make clear that the economic message is heard. And when you see public opinion right now, we certainly have tremendous economic turbulence in many respects right now, from obviously inflation, but also because of the COVID pandemic. We've had a number of progressive initiatives that have actually been delivered to the people. They've proven very popular. Now we see people backtracking on them. And then we have what's a very, very interesting sort of recalibration sort of in the soul of the country about the grand relationship we have to our jobs that's going on in the United States of America. And so it really seems like an hour where it'd be beneficial for progressives to lift up and highlight, along with all of the other priorities, not diminishing any of them, but to recognize that the economic argument is a very strong argument, very, very strong argument for the progressives, and it's not right now being heard. And just to finish before we go to Professor Kaye, and I've spoken enough because Professor Kaye's wisdom supersedes mine for sure. Part of the inspiration for this was, of course, Harvey's work on this over the years, but also a really, I thought, tremendously obnoxious new rule from Bill Maher, where he clearly was defining the progressive left in a caricatured way that just dismissed what is so appealing to people about the progressive movement, completely leaving out the economic component. So this is why we brought this forward now.
It's interesting you say that, and because I immediately think of the New Deal, but there was a reaction by neoliberals, neocons, whoever, the conservative forces, that's Harvey's area, to the New Deal. But simultaneously, you had many people who saw the holes in the New Deal, where, ironically, as much as Bill Maher likes to say, we're all focused on being woke or whatever his deal is, it's actually, that's been missing. And I think what's fascinating about this is it's not, it seems like it's building upon what was presented, so long ago. Am I getting that right, Harvey?
Sorry.
No, go ahead. I mean, because many people say, "Oh, the New Deal was racist." I'm going to summarize it pretty blankly.
Yeah, well, the New Deal initiatives were not racist. The New Deal initiatives to get them through the Congress were folks were carved out of the New Deal by Southern Democrats, the white supremacist Southern Democrats. But the thing is, so we've had 80 years to mature, right? And the thing to consider is this: the Democratic Party in 1960 actually had a platform that was based upon the Economic Bill of Rights of FDR in 1944. In the same year that the Republicans and Democrats alike began to seriously acknowledge, in light of the struggles taking place, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and others down south realized that it was imperative to bring an end, at least in the South, to apartheid, segregation, white supremacy. And it's interesting to note that the Democratic Party in 1960 had a platform that literally laid out the Economic Bill of Rights and all of the things Democrats would pursue to realize that. And that in the course of the 1960s themselves, you had A. Philip Randolph proposing a freedom budget in 1965 that really was standing on the shoulders of Lyndon Johnson's own call for great society and FDR's Economic Bill of Rights. And he laid out a plan. And as long as we're on video, he laid out a plan that.
What does the plan say for the audio, folks? There's podcasts too. Just tell us what the plan says.
Okay. A freedom budget for all Americans, budgeting our resources to achieve freedom from want. The plan was between 1966 and 1975 to spend the kinds of monies, which at the time were estimated at about $20 billion a year, to literally rebuild cities, redevelop the rural areas of America, bring an end to poverty in the United States. And this was endorsed by 150 plus academics, labor leaders, civil rights leaders, foundation leaders, and progressive politicians. And of course, the tragedy was that Lyndon Johnson, who was at that time embracing the idea of a great society, a war on poverty, and also was planning, and they actually did hold it, though it did not take place as it should have. It took place in the White House, a conference to honor A. Philip Randolph. And then in the wake of that is where the war in Vietnam is draining resources. And in 1968, Martin Luther King Jr., who in the early 60s had called for a minority Bill of Rights, now proposed truly embracing the concept of an economic Bill of Rights for all Americans, just that kind of thing, and called for it, I believe, in the pages of Look magazine, and it later also, I believe, was in the Guardian newspaper and is readily available there if anyone wants to look for it. The thing is that, yes, the New Deal was inadequate in a whole variety of ways, and but the point is we have had 80 years to learn based on the struggles of the 50s, the 60s, and the struggles we've seen these past several years to address the needs of working people in all their diversity, and to make sure that no one, based on any kind of criteria, would be left out of the rights that all Americans deserve for economic security, for democracy, and for the making of a more prosperous America.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely. Good afternoon again. I hear in your voice, Professor Kaye, the fact that we have had enough time to not only solve any problems that may have existed with the previous plans, but we've also had plenty of time to understand the very nature of the problem. Could you just talk about why it would be that why would it be that we have the solution right in front of us, but the powerful would rather go in the opposite direction of exploiting us to our last penny, when we actually could do better if we tried something other than abject exploitation?
Well, so consider the fact that in the 1970s, capital and the right, eventually joined by neoliberal Democrats, essentially and Alan may or may not subscribe to this particular argument, essentially declared war on working people. Not only working people, but especially on the rights of women, and all the more so in reaction to the Voting Rights Act of the 1960s, a war on the rights of people of color, which actually ended up a war on voting rights that was possibly excluding in many a state students, not only African-American, but white students, the elderly, regardless of their race or ethnicity. I mean, we have seen 45 years of war on the democratic achievements of the 1930s through the 1960s. And it's in those years of the 1970s where this war is declared. And moreover, the leading folks in the Democratic Party, led before Reagan even came there by Jimmy Carter and centrist Democrats, declared war by way of saying we need austerity in America. We have to liberate capital. And the conservatives found this as an opportunity to go after those folks who had benefited the most from the changes of the 1960s. Now, this is the interesting thing. This is why your question is so good. Right through the 1970s and the 1980s, the kinds of things that Roosevelt and the progressive Democrats in the 70s had pursued, most Americans, all the surveys showed, most Americans still wanted, whether it had to do with civil rights or economic security. They wanted it. And so what we're talking about here is not simply the Democrats forgot who they were. There were active Democrats who truly wanted to end the democratic achievements of the 30s through the 60s. And by the way, Jimmy Carter's family was an anti-FDR family, and Jimmy Carter himself had no affection for Franklin Roosevelt. And then the problem on top of that is, while the Democrats are in disarray, progressives and corporate Democrats and the diverse social movements of the 60s were competing with each other in the 70s, Capital got it together.
Yeah.
They got it together. I've talked about this many a time I think I've talked about it many a time on your show too, Ben, but I know I've talked about it many a time on Nomiki show. So the fact is that this Economic Bill of Rights, what's fascinating to me is that as Alan and I developed this, we know for a fact that most Americans want this, and they've wanted this since 1944.
Right before this segment, we had Representative Shannon on from Georgia, and we were talking about the repressive laws to go after voters, particularly from Black and brown communities across this country. And she's, Ben's in Georgia right now. And what I find so fascinating, what you just said, is there's an opportunity right now for Biden. I mean, if I'm going to be, if I'm going to play like the centrist game a little bit, he could easily put in one win and say, see, and keep the people divided the way that I truly believe neoliberals have worked for 45 years. Keep them divided. You keep folks thinking that it's not about the economy, it's about fighting with each other. But instead of saying, okay, I do want to pursue expanding voting rights and fixing a lot of these laws, and or go after an economic bill of rights, he's doing nothing. And I feel like that's actually creating a scenario in which people are going to unify around all of these issues and see that the common enemy is the strategy of the last 50 years, 45 years since Carter. I mean, I'll start with Ben, because you're there. Like, what do you feel? Do you feel like folks are not feeling pitted against each other in the same way they used to?
Well, actually, I feel like that connection. I was hearing as Professor Kaye was talking about the backlash of some of these policies impacting more than just the intended target. I was thinking about Representative Shannon also with regard to the voting rights being violated and how that is being impacted on more than just communities of color or more than just Democrats in this case. The impact of this generation of unbridled, I don't care, like we could just catch it all, the powerful, right? We could, however we break it down, I think that there is a consensus, Nomiki, and everyone. I think there's a consensus amongst those people who have power, which is not only to divide and conquer, but is such a commitment to an ideology that I think at this point, Nomiki, if I could come back to what you're saying, I feel like they're not even playing their best politics for their own strategy, right? because they're so committed to some antiquated beliefs about capitalism. It's like they're at a crossroads. Established Democrats don't know how to proceed, because the best way to proceed is something along the lines of the Economic Bill of Rights.
So Alan, you run PDA and you work with a lot of candidates, and you have been for many, many years all over the country. When folks sign on, is this like a Medicare for all thing? Oh, yeah, Medicare for all. Many people signed on. Many believe, in Medicare for all and will fight for it. But there are also a lot of folks who signed on because it was popular and helped get them elected. But if it actually came time to vote on Medicare for all, maybe they wouldn't. Maybe they wouldn't support, or maybe if they're running for president, they'd pull away, or some other Senate or something else. How do you see this playing out when folks get elected?
Well, it is the final question on our questionnaire. Look, it's really are we actually proposing to proceed with a constitutional amendment to produce 10 new entries on the U.S. Constitution? That requires 3/4 of state assemblies across the country to pass it. No, we're not proposing that is the thing in front of us. What we are trying to build is we're trying to anchor this economic program as definitional for people who are saying they're running as progressives. Look, I really do think that there are essentially 3 parties inside our 2-party system right now. Now, there's some gray area there. We saw a lot of moderate Democrats vote more progressively on Build Back Better through Biden's lead. We should not have any illusions. This was happening in the crisis around the pandemic, right? They've done the relief act, so what can they do to keep the economy boosted during this time of crisis? And clearly the pandemic, going back to the CARES Act, led to a disregard for budget deficits and providing for the general population some welfare that was otherwise way off the table ideologically. So it happened in that context. But it also maybe showed to some of the more moderate Democrats the appeal of some of these progressive politics. I don't doubt for a second that most of them will double back towards being neoliberal Democrats. So we have a battle inside the Democratic Party, and we want to anchor a commitment to these economic policies, because neoliberalism has failed the American public, the vast majority of the American public. If you think of politics as what we decide to do with the surplus that our society generates, we basically have a system that we're living in now that designates all of that surplus to the investor class to make them richer. And the rest of us keep going at best at the sort of evil level, just barely keeping our heads above water as we in our work generate the surplus. That's right. Lousy, lousy, lousy social system. In so many ways, there are so many signifiers that we basically have a failing social system in the United States. I mean, we have a mass incarceration system that keeps a steady 2 million people in prison. That's a signifier of a failed social system. The homeless population, the levels of depression, on and on down the line. We need a different social contract, and an anchor for that has to be an economic, essentially, Bill of Rights, an economic agreement, an economic accord, a different social contract. So that's what we're trying to establish and achieve. We know that 60 to 70 members of the House are firmly with this right now. We want to get that up to the majority of House members. And by the way, we know there's sort of progressives in name only inside the Progressive Caucus too. But
with pressure,
Yeah, with pressure, exactly. Sure. And in the short term, we're going to have to try to persuade some people who aren't initially on our team to support these policies, hopefully to get to where this is the majority tendency and it takes over the Democratic Party. Because for all sorts of reasons I don't want to get into, and we all can debate about, the petri dish of American politics for political science just shows that we end up with a 2-party system as a default within the society. We can analyze why that is to death, but it just seems to be the case. It is consistently the case, and it will almost undoubtedly remain so in the near future. And to achieve the social changes we need and desperately need in our society, not only because of the extant real human rights atrocities that exist within the domestic United States of America, right? But also because of the climate emergency. We need change, and we need change fast. We need the population to buy into our political team that wants to see benign social in our society and in the world. And by the way, democracy is in danger in this country. And oligarchy and democracy are like oil and water. They don't mix. And right now, with the balance of power where it's held in our society, it's going to be a struggle. And that goes to this question that Benjamin raised, which is so deep, about why you have the resistance, the complete resistance of most of the establishment to these changes. It's sometimes soft resistance, sometimes hard. Well, they're benefiting from the current system. And they're probably insecure about how they would continue to benefit in any other system. Even if this isn't a direct attack on oligarchs and their wealth, such that it just eliminates it, right? At most, what we have on the table is higher taxation rates, and they'll be disgustingly wealthy at 2/3 of the level that they currently are. It's insane. But we need a new social contract. Go ahead.
I have to say that I think about this as the only way to save the Democratic Party, which is the only way to save American democratic life, is to enhance it. And progressives who are running right now are not running like from a hole. They're running from a real momentum that we've seen 2015-16, 2020. There is that group known as the Squad. Their numbers have increased. We can increase them now. The point is the Progressive Caucus needs to feel their energy in the heat, especially of the young folks who must make demands on the caucus to make demands on the legislative caucus as a whole inside the House and indeed also in the Senate. But the main thing is this. When we see
Harvey, 1 second, real quick. I'm sorry if you're not seeing the chat. I just want to give final. Ben has to run, but let's.
Oh, sure.
No, it's okay. I just wanted, if you have final thoughts, Ben, I know you have to chime in.
No, not at all. Nomiki, you're so responsive. I thank you for being such a responsive host. I was give you a few minutes warning, but listen, I really am excited to continue this specific conversation on our show. I know we're setting it up, I believe, for the later on this week. So
Friday morning,
gentlemen,
very early.
Friday morning. I am excited about it. And Nomiki, is always a pleasure spending time with you.
Super grateful. Thank you so much. Professor, I know you were on a roll, but while you're on that roll, do you mind throwing in what's actually in this Economic Bill of Rights? And
okay, well, the one that's in the original article, we've enhanced. Okay, we've enhanced. So I'll go through them, but since I know we've only got 5-10 minutes at the very most, let me go through them. First, the right to a useful job that pays a living wage, and if I think Alan and I agree that if we could see anything most immediately, we'd want a guaranteed job at a living wage, which would thereby begin to address questions of inequality and also economic security and economic empowerment. Second, the right to a voice in the workplace through a union and collective bargaining. That's a democratic enhancement, which would have a tremendous impact on American life. If we think back to the most progressive years in American history, from the 30s through the 60s, it was the years in which not only was there a dynamic civil rights movement, but even in some fashion, more importantly, at the beginning, there was a very dynamic and expansive labor movement. We need labor to be a countervailing power to the power of the oligarchy, the autocracy. The right to comprehensive quality health care. We know, whether it's called Medicare for all or universal health care, Americans have wanted this, as I said before, since 1944. There's nothing radical in that call. 4. Alan, did you want to say something along the way? I saw.
No, except I think you should probably read through quickly because we'll run out of time.
The right
to keep going. Don't worry, I'm the moderator. I'll cut you guys off.
The right to a complete cost-free public education and access to broadband internet. And we are seriously considering how to build in a right to childcare for the students who have kids, to put it that way, okay? The right to decent, safe, affordable housing. The right to a clean environment and a healthy planet. We're also going to be working on that a bit more. The right to a meaningful endowment of resources at birth, and possibly free childcare will build into this, and to a secure retirement. The right to sound banking and financial services. The right to an equitable and economically fair justice system. Finally, the right to recreation and participation in civic and democratic life. So during these last couple of weeks since we last saw you, Nomiki, we've been trying to enhance this Bill of Rights in favor of enhancing its appeal.
Absolutely. And Alan, how are people processing this? Is it people are signing up, but how is it being received on the campaign trail when folks are going out there and running?
Well, to be honest with you, Nomiki, one of the things that was very quirky about this is Harvey and I wrote the article. We even held it back a few days, thinking that maybe Putin wouldn't invade Ukraine. He did invade Ukraine. And of course, our capacity to have this be as foregrounded as we'd like it to be has been somewhat usurped by everyone's focus being on the geopolitical crisis. But everybody we talked to is just really thrilled about it. Just the other day on the Wisconsin State House floor, a version was introduced there. Harvey's in touch with a few other already elected officials around the country. And then with the congressional candidates, they're all very into it. And again, we'll be in the coming weeks trying to even build up more momentum for it and to look to candidates to foreground this. Now, the candidates who've been working most closely, and this goes a little bit to some of the early questions in this interview. I myself, in working with Harvey, obviously two white guys, I wouldn't be comfortable if we didn't have clear. We really are working in close alliance with two people in particular, Senator Vincent Fort, who's challenging the conservative Democrat David Scott in Georgia's 13th district, and Senator Nina Turner. Nina has, in fact, really embraced this and is really charging forward with it in her race against Shontel Brown. And I also, by the way, want to point out a candidate I haven't spoken to directly about this, but Erica Smith in North Carolina's 1st District. If you go to her webpage, and she is running in a largely rural and significantly Black district in North Carolina, a very poor district. And on her webpage, the quote that is up front is, "We will come together from small towns and farms across our district to win this seat and deliver a new deal for rural North Carolinians." So it's very important that, given the history of the New Deal and the response of the New Deal by many African Americans, that we work in coordination in tandem with leading African American politicians and candidates across the country and lifting this up. And we're also, of course, building upon the work of the academics William Darity and Derek Hamilton, two great Black economists. And the response, again, across the country has been universally positive. And there's a strong recognition with everyone we speak to of the necessity of lifting up the claim made to the general public that if you want a better economic social contract, the progressive Democrats, understood broadly, not just our organization, but the progressives who are running in the sort of Sanders lineage are the group of people to support if you want a better deal as we go forward, as we emerge out of this pandemic. And don't forget, this has been the largest social disruption any of us have had in our lifetimes within the domestic United States, an opportunity to really redraw and reset our social contract like we probably haven't seen before. We should seize this opportunity. And this is a template that people are embracing to set the table for doing that.
Professor Harvey Kaye, final thoughts? We got about 2 minutes.
Well, final thoughts are these, okay? There are two
I'm sorry,
dimensions
breaking news. I'm so sorry to say this. Secretary of State Madeleine Albright just died, was just announced. I'm so sorry to say this in the middle of this. Just have to get that information out there we can just process it. Something like that, we have to kind of interject.
Yeah, I'll also tell you that the Supreme Court of the United States this morning has basically decided that the redistricting plan that had finally been accepted in the state of Wisconsin, the governor's plan, is now thrown out. Okay, so the congressional seats will be sustained, but the legislative seats will now have to be addressed once again. That's another breaking thing. I can tell you that is not good. Okay, every time these kinds of things happen, the Republicans, given the strength they have in the legislature, it's tough. So on that note, I will say, if we want to take back America, it is absolutely essential that the Democrats once again become the party of the economic Bill of Rights.
Absolutely. I thank you guys so much. I'm sorry for breaking in the middle. It's just we're wrapping the show pretty quickly today with a hard out, so I had to get it in before the end, and otherwise people won't tune into the show because there's breaking news. Well, the department officially stating that Putin is a war criminal. That's beyond Joe Biden's statement. That is an official statement from the State Department now. So
join with George W. Bush and Dick Cheney in that game. So there we go.
Of course, of course. But here we are today. So, all right, Alan Minsky, Professor Harvey Kaye, so grateful to you. Thank you for joining us for Solidarity Wednesday. This crazy show we've had today. It's been a little bit of a whirlwind. Lots of stuff happening. So very grateful to you as always. And we have the link for the Economic Bill of Rights up on the page so people can go check it out and support your work. And we'll have you back on soon to see where this is going in this insane campaign season that we're in, where, people still don't know what their lines are.
Right.
Everybody out there, tell your friends about the Nomiki Comes show. This kind of discourse is what needs to be spread around this country into every household. Tell your friends, families, and coworkers.
I did not pay you to say that, Alan.
No, but I come out of a media background, and this is, the level of we want a vibrant democracy in this country. We need this kind of show to be known by everyone.
Indeed, and we got to pressure our lawmakers to make sure that they crack down on the tech companies who are boosting those right-wing bro shows like Brogan. All right, you deserve a mug. Everybody deserves a mug. Harvey just put his mug up on the screen. You know what? I'm not near my mugs. They're in another state, so we used to send them out, and they're being held in storage because we stopped sending out mugs for a while. But we're gonna get back on it. The problem is that the way that you send merch out, it's very expensive. And there needs to be, tech companies like to hack a lot of things. Hack that. I don't ask you to hack much, but hack that system. Thanks, Privatization. Exactly. That's David. Full circle. Thank you to everybody. We will see you on Friday. Hopefully my voice will be back by then. Make sure to sign up for Patreon if you haven't already. And if you can, join us at patreon.com/The Nomiki Show. And like and share everything. Join us on Twitch if you don't do that. Find us on social media. You know the whole jam. We're so grateful to all of our guests and to David. And we will see you on Friday. In the meantime, stay in solidarity.
The Nomiki Show. Clash momentarily for class solidarity. Cash circulating, give the masses back its currency. Greed from elites, oligarchs stay fed. Deep state, fake fed, everybody break bread. Racism, homophobia, sexism, religion in this melting pot we live in. Time to build a new system, unionize labor rights. Highlight the issue, talking heads left is best. The saga continues. The Nomiki Show.